Hello YouTube, this is Froogle and welcome back to part 3, the final part of our fully loaded 737 NGX flight from Juneau to Anchorage, Alaska. Now we're in the cruise and we're only about 20 odd miles away from Yak, so let's go ahead and look at our flight plan and compare our performance on our flight to what our flight plan actually says. The way we can do that is actually very simple. I showed you some of this actually in the climb up to cruise. So if we pop open the CDU and click on progress, you see here Yak is 20 miles away. We're expected to arrive at 21:17. Now in the previous video I did actually click chronometer. I should have clicked elapsed time, so now you're seeing elapsed time down here, which is a lot more readable than the chronometer. We're currently 26 minutes into the flight. Yak has us arriving at 21:17, which is in 3 minutes time, so that puts us at 29 minutes into the flight, and it's estimating 14.4 thousand pounds of fuel. If we look at our flight plan, you'll see that at Yak it's also saying 29 minutes is the time that we should arrive at that waypoint, and also the fuel remaining should be 14.6. So we are still a little bit under on the fuel, nothing really to worry about, but overall on the time we're doing pretty good. Now what if we weren't? What if we're actually behind on time? Well, some Boeings, notably the 777 for example, have a feature called RTA, which is required time of arrival, and you can feed that in and it will adjust your performance and your speed so that you try to meet the required time of arrival. Obviously we can't do that. What we could do if we were off schedule, notably if we were too slow, so running behind, there's two things we could do. If we go over to initref and then click on index, from there you can see a number of items down here, and one of them is performance. If we click on performance, the cost index is controlling our speed in the cruise. We could change that, so increase it predominantly to speed up, and that would move the autopilot's speed setting up, obviously, which would allow us to bring in the time a little bit. The other option of course would be to just go into speed hold, so clicking up here and adjust the speed manually up here. So two options there if you are running behind time, but we're doing just fine, so we're not going to worry about that. Let's check on our progress. We are only 2 miles away right now, so we're looking for Yak to move up to the top, and then we'll cross-check the time here and our fuel down here with our flight plan, just to make sure we're not wrong. There we go, it just went up. So we are 29 minutes in and we are 300 pounds of fuel too light, but that's just fine. So although we are now 211 miles away, you can see here from top of descent, let's go ahead and look at our approach. Now we already set up the approach somewhat on the ground back in Juneau, and based on what I had seen on weather reports, it doesn't really matter which runway we're going to fly into. The weather in Anchorage today is pretty stable, pretty light winds. We could really go anywhere we like. We're going to take the ILS though into runway 07 left. Let's just double check how the weather looks. So I'm using Active Sky Next, and I did load in my flight plan. What that means is I can go down here and I can dial in 12202. If I click that over, you hear the weather report for Anchorage.
Airport information, Golf 205 Zulu weather, wind, calm, visibility 10, sky conditions, few clouds at 100, temperature -3, dew point -6, altimeter 3056, advise an initial contact with information, Golf.
Okay, so the winds are calm. We do have some clouds and the temperature is negative, so we might be landing with anti-ice on. We'll have to see how the clouds look when we get there. And I think it said 3056 as the barometric. We can key that in now as a standby. We'll probably change it when we get closer. But just go up here and in the usual way, change the barometric pressure. And you'll see we're currently in standard. There. You see we're currently in standard, but we have dialed in 3056 as the standby barometric pressure, so we can just change that very easily by clicking that standard button. Winds are calm, so 07 left does work. So let's go down to the CDU and let's double check what we've got here. So our arrival, we have 07 left is selected and Witty 1 as the star that we're going to use, so we're all good there. The thing that we can look at though, if we go ahead and look at the star, and in particular look at the actual approach, first of all, the star, we're coming in from JOH Johnson, so that fits just fine. That's our transition from our normal flight plan into the star, and you can see that highlighted in the star right there. And if we go ahead and look at the actual approach onto runway 07 left, what we could do, you can see the first entry point on the left there is Kenai, which is the ENA VOR. That's the initial approach fix. We need to fly from that on a radial of 011 degrees until we intercept the ILS, then we'll turn right onto a heading of 071 and obviously land. So we could actually set up a transition from the star to the approach using that waypoint. I'll show you how to do that. So we'll go up here, we'll go previous page, so we'll make sure we re-click ILS07 left. Next page, Witty 1. Our transition into the star is JOH, Juliet Oscar Hotel, and our transition from the star to the approach is ENA. So we can just click on that and now click execute, and that will change everything in our route to fit. And we can double check that very easily. Just change your view a little bit. Now I'm going to change the range on this display to make it a lot smaller, and we're going to switch this switch over here to the right into plan mode. And what we can do now, if I go to legs, you'll see a little step button bottom right. I can step through the waypoints. So you see Katat here is the next waypoint on our route, and then we're going to go to, oops, there we go, Castle, then JOH, click it again, that puts into Witty. The next waypoint, Slow, Silty, Andy, and then it says Vector. And the reason for that is normally at that point or some point around there you would get directions from air traffic control to guide you. Maybe you're too high as well and you need to extend the leg. So there are vectors in there between Andy and between ENA. That's just fine. We'll use that to extend our leg if we need to reduce altitude or reduce speed too much before finally going back to ENA. Now, having reached ENA, you'll see that the diagram on a navigation display does show us flying 011. Oops, I clicked on the wrong button. 011 all the way up to the approach into Anchorage. So that's all set up. There's not much else to do. We could feasibly at this point go ahead and set up radios, but we'll save that for closer to the top of descent. So having checked our flight plan, flick this back into map mode, change the range back up to something useful. We'll go there. You notice I got a lot of clutter here because I have data turned on. We'll turn that off. There we go. Makes things a little bit easier to see. And we can go back to our pilot's flying display. So once we reach top of descent, which is in about 170, 180 miles time, then we'll rejoin in this video and I'll show you how to set up for the descent. Alright, still about, I guess, 120 or so miles away from top of descent, which is very early, but I want to talk through these charts. So the first chart I want to look at is the star. Now looking at the star, we are going to join the star at Johnston Point, which is Juliet Oscar Hotel. Now that's actually a VOR, it's 116.7. We're going to dial that in, and the reason we dial that in, somebody asked me about this or called me out incorrectly on the previous video, is it gives us information down here, and we can cross-reference that information with what we're seeing up here. It's unusual, but not unheard of for GPS and ADIRS to get out of a line and not give you an accurate view of where you actually are. So by setting up VOR1 and VOR2, we can cross-check everything. So down here on the radios, we're going to set up 116.7 on nav1. So we'll just dial that up, 116 there. So 116.7 is active nav1. Nav2 we're going to set to Middleton Island, MDO, Mike Delta Oscar, 115.3. 115.3, and we'll make that active. Now the reason for that, again looking at that star, is after we leave Johnston, at the next waypoint, the Witty waypoint, where we need to be at or above 16,000 feet, we should be exactly 97 miles away from MDO and exactly 50 miles away from Johnston Point. So by setting up those two VORs here, we can see here whether or not we are in the correct position. We can just look down here and this should say 50, this should say 97. That would indicate that we are at the right point if it says here that we are at Johnston. So that's great. Now after we leave Johnston, we've got to start thinking about the actual approach. The next VOR we're going to be very interested in is Kenai or ENA. So let's take a look at that. So we'll go ahead and dial that in on standby. That's 117.6. So we'll just dial this up, 117.6. That is standby. And then there's another radio here which is very, very useful, which is Anchorage, 113.5. So we'll dial that over here as standby. Now, ENA is our entry point into the final approach. to ILS runway 07 left. So it's very useful to have that pop up and show us that we're the right point. But also as we hit ENA and turn on a heading of 011, once we're 39 miles away, we should have turned onto a heading of 071 to land. If that goes beyond 39 miles, something's very wrong. So it's useful to have that up here. Obviously when we hit ENA, we also need to dial in here the ILS frequency. Having Anchorage over here is very useful because it gives us a distance away from the airport. In fact, I've actually got that wrong. I've dialed in Anchorage and no, that's fine. Well, that's just fine. So that's going to give us the distance away from Anchorage. So we're going to know not only how far away are we from ENA and have we turned at the right point, but also at all times how far away are we from the airport. And again, it's a cross-check. The FMC and the primary navigation display here will also show you information up here, like it's saying right now, Katat, we're 48 nautical miles away from Katat. So you'll always have this information, which is coming from the ADARUs and the IRSs and all that stuff, but we're going to have backup information from the VORs to allow us to cross-check and make sure nothing has gone horribly wrong. Now, looking at this approach chart, I'll talk you through it. At the top, it says our final ILS is 109.9, that's India Tango Golf November, and we're going to be tracking 071 onto the runway. The threshold elevation, so the height above sea level, is 128 feet. The aerodrome itself is 151 feet, and our transition level is 180. Now, moving on down towards the bottom, you'll see that for an ILS, it's got the minimums number there. Our minimums should be barometric 330 feet, which is radar altimeter 200 feet. So we can dial in our minimums now. And again, I'm doing this all a little bit soon, just because I want to talk you through it. So we'll dial in here 330. As our minimum, and we'll put that on the first officer side as well, just because it's good practice to, especially if later on you start using something like FS to crew. Although FS to crew does have a handy little pop-up that you can use as well. So our minimums are set. Now, also looking at the chart, from ENA we want to be at 1600 feet. As we turn on to 071 degrees, we're going to be on 1600 feet until we intercept the glide slope at 6.4 miles away from India Tango Golf November, which is the ILS transmitter. So that's the point at which that's our final approach fix, where we can start descending to land. Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward ILS approach. You can see that circle in there as well, showing us that from TED, which is the Anchorage VOR, between 360 degrees, so north and east, there is mountain or terrain rising to 1800 feet. And then to the right of that, so southish rising to 5600 feet, and then westish rising to 8900 feet. So those are the nearby obstacles. And we can also see here what happens if we don't manage to land. If we don't manage to land, we're going to proceed on the runway heading 071 degrees to 600 feet, then make a right turn to 230 degrees, climbing up to 2500 feet. Once we intercept the 209 radial from TED, from TED, I always get those wrong as to which one. Then we're going to turn onto that radio and then hold at the waypoint Duke P. So all good, we're not going to miss the runway, we should be landing just fine. We are pretty much all set up, now only 80 miles away. So let's actually look at the actual checklists that we would, or the flows I should say, that we would do. So descent procedure, pressurization, make sure that the airport altitude is set in. Well, the airport altitude we just saw is 150 feet. So up here, landing altitude, we're going to move this up 150. Good. Passenger signs, a little too early, but it doesn't matter, there's nobody in the back really, so we'll make sure that either auto or on. We're going to turn them on. Recall, check that we have no warnings. Do that by clicking that, there are no warnings. Auto brake, we're going to have level 2 today, which is a fairly normal level of auto brake, not too hard, not too soft. Now we need our landing data. What is our VREF? What are our minimums? Well, we just figured out the minimums. They're 330 feet. So landing data, you can do that over here. If we go to, if we click on init ref, and you'll see we've got the approach reference here, and it's got flaps 15, 157 knots, flaps 30, 149, flaps 40, 142. Looking at the performance data that I got out of TopCat for this particular flight, we actually have landing data in there, and the landing data says engine anti-ice and wing anti-ice will be on. We're not sure yet, but they might be. And it will be flaps 40. So select flaps 40, like so, and put that in there. And it says VREF of 142, V approach of 147. We got the VREF there of 142. You can see the ILS here, 109.9. So that is all set and that is all good. The other thing that you could mess with if you want to, I'm not going to, is the descent forecast. So we go into descent, go into forecast, and you can put in the wind at various altitudes, and that will affect how the flight computers calculate whether or not you can actually manage this descent. We're not going to worry about that because from my point of view it feels a little odd alt-tabbing out to a Windows app to grab the wind. So we're going to leave that blank. It doesn't matter. Unlike in the 777 where you have a data link and it can populate all this stuff on the fly for you. Let's go back to our progress chart, progress page, and see where we're at. We're at CATAT. Our top of descent is just after JOH. So we have a little while to go yet, I think. Not too far though. But I will see you now very, very close to JOH, at which point we'll put in our descent altitude and initiate the descent. Okay, welcome back. We're now very much into our descent. We're heading towards Whitty, which is what we have the radios tuned to cross-reference. Looking at the star, you'll see once again, just as a reminder, that when we get to Whitty, we should be 97 miles away from MDO, and we should be 50 miles away from Juliet Oscar Hotel. Now I started this descent using Descent Now. Over here, you click on the descent page, you'll see a button here called Descent Now. Click on that and click on Execute. That starts a very shallow descent. And I started out about 5 miles earlier than top of descent, and that is a little bit more comfortable for the people in the back. It puts us in a 1,000 feet per minute shallow descent until we intercept VNAV path, which we're about to do. Now, let me show you what all this stuff over here means. This is currently our deviation from VNAV path. We are currently about 50 feet underneath where the autoflight system thinks we should be, and that's just fine. Later on in this flight, because of the altitude constraints that we had, if I bring up legs here, you'll see that at or above 8,000, and then on the next page, at or above 2,000, at or above 2,000, we will find ourselves a little bit higher than the autoflight system wants us to be, and that's just fine as well. In fact, let's go ahead and have a chat about that right now. What we're going to find, and I did cover this I think earlier, sorry, I tend to record these parts of the videos on different days sometimes, but if we put this in plan mode, change our range, with the transition from the star, the ENE transition from the star onto runway 07 left, we actually got a bit of an issue in the flight plan here. So if I step through this, you'll see, when we get there, you'll see that the magenta line extends off into infinity. ENE is way down here. In fact, it's about 38 miles away from this waypoint. So normally the reason that's in there is we would expect ATC to get involved. They would start vectoring us around. In fact, if I step through this, you'll see here it says vector. So ENA, my apologies. It says vector because we would be expecting some involvement, I guess, from air traffic control. We obviously don't have air traffic control today, so it's kind of at our discretion as to what we're going to do. And I think what we are going to do is fairly simple. We are currently descending down to 2,000 because that's the last constraint that we have. And so we are probably going to find ourselves... I've gone too far again, haven't I? Let me go through this once again. There's slow, there's silty. Okay, we're probably going to find ourselves here a little bit too high, probably around 5,000 to 6,000 feet, not 2,000. So we're going to let it continue down to about 3,000 feet, and then we'll turn direct to this waypoint. Now, that screws things up a little bit. In terms of the actual ILS approach, if we look at the chart, you'll see that ENA, Echo November Alpha, is actually flagged on that ILS approach as, let me bring up the chart here, IAF, which is Initial Approach Fix. Now the reason that's important for a 737, in fact any aircraft, is if you go and read the FCOMs, in particular the FCTM, the Flight Crew Training Manual on how to fly an ILS approach, you will see that at the Initial Approach Fix, that is the point at which we go to flaps 1. A problem that I typically have, I'm going to try to overcome in this part of this video, is my speeds. I typically fly the approach too slowly, and there's really no need for that. What happens is, as you start to decelerate, you can see a decel marker here, it's really up to the pilot what happens next. It would decelerate down to a point where you could extend flaps. If you do extend flaps, then VNAV and the autoflight system figures, okay, we're in the approach, we're looking to land now. It will set an even lower speed. If when you hit that even lower speed you extend the flaps more, you'll go even slower because it will set an even slower speed. So the IAF is the point at which we would typically go to flaps 1. And then following the line from Echo November Alpha, this turn here, right here, is where we would typically go flaps 5. we hold the flaps 5 configuration until we start to intercept the glide slope, at which point we go flaps 15, gear down, and then work through the flap stages down to our V approach, which today I think is 147 knots. So that's why IAF is quite important, and not hitting IAF is going to give us some issues. So what we will do is, as we pass this deceleration point and we're descending, when we get to about 3,000 feet, maybe 3.5, that's when I'll say this is the initial approach fix. We'll go to flaps 1 and we'll start our turn back here, and then as we come out of that turn we'll go flaps 5, and we should all be set up for the approach. In fact, we probably won't even go flaps 5, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll probably remain flaps 1 until we hit this, which is flaps 5, because that's the point at which we would normally do it. Otherwise, once again, we're going to find ourselves way out here on the path, and again, as usual in most of my videos, way too slow. So just letting you know what's going on there. Anyway, let's take this out of plan and see where we are. Okay, so Whitty is now 15 miles away, and we were looking, as I said, for 50 miles and 97 miles. So 50 miles here, 97 miles here. So we can just drop down. And this isn't a big deal, this is just to show you how you can do it. It's just a cross fix to verify from the radios that what we're seeing from the ADARUs and the IRS, the inertial reference system, is absolutely correct. That this waypoint really, really is the same as these radios say it is, which means according to the star chart, we are exactly where we want to be. You can already see it's looking highly likely. It's looking highly likely now, because I have those two VORs tuned as well. You can already see here on this display the two needles are pointing exactly where they should. We have let me see here. Yeah, we have Johnston JOH immediately behind us. We have MDO off to the left behind us, which concurs with what we have on that chart as well. So far everything is looking good. It looks like we're going to be exactly where we think we are. We don't need to worry or do anything strange. Incidentally, what would happen if you did have to do anything strange? It's highly unlikely in the simulator, unless you have an IRS failure, that you would need to do anything different. But if we did have to do anything different, then obviously what we would say is we've got a GPS failure, there's something wrong, and we would start tracking the entire approach now using radios. The approach that we're using, however, is an RNAV approach. It relies on all this equipment working, so we would need to switch to a different approach, which obviously is not going to happen today. So we are 7 miles out now. We are at 90 miles here. We're looking for 97 and 50. You can see this is coming up, so there's already a 7 mile difference. It's looking perfect, right? Now there should be roughly a 6 mile difference, which there roughly is between those two numbers. Alright, 2 nautical miles away from Whitty now. You can see within 2 nautical miles this is definitely going to read 50. This is likely to be extremely close to 97. We are good. We don't have to worry about that. So let's go ahead and switch the radio frequencies over now to the next ones. Now, as I said, I don't think this one actually works in FSX. We'll switch it on anyway. But we should see at least ENA, Echo November Alpha, appear up here now. And there it is, Echo November Alpha, 87 miles away. And you can see the arrow is pointing off up there, which is roughly correct as well. So what we can do at this point then is go ahead and tune the ILS in standby standby nav 1 and standby nav 2, which is 109.9. And we'll go ahead and set the rest of everything up for our landing. So 109.9, 109.9. The reason we tune both is we're going to rely on both and use both autopilots as well, both auto flight systems, Command A and Command B, to handle an auto. Will be set up for an auto land if necessary. Obviously it's not going to be necessary, we will land ourselves. So with those two set up, we can head back up here and then set our courses in. The landing course is 071 degrees for runway 7 left. And everything's all set. Let's move the range back up on this display. That's a bit of a mess, as you can see, so we'll keep it somewhat small. We're currently at an 80 mile range, so we'll reduce this to 40. And what I will do here is turn on data. Now data will show us altitude constraints. So for this waypoint coming up, we need to be between 15,000 and 12,000 feet, flight level 120 and 150. Looks like we're going to hit that. We're currently approaching flight level 180, which incidentally is the transition level. Now, we already keyed in the standby barometric pressure. Let's just go and double check that and make sure nothing has changed again.
Papa Alpha November Charlie Airport information Mike 2053, Zulu, weather, wind, calm, visibility 10, sky conditions, few clouds at 100, temperature -3, dew point -6, altimeter 3056, rise on initial.
Alright, so everything's looking good there. We just passed the transition level, so we'll click standard. We're now at 3056. Let's make sure it concurs over here. It does, 3056. And it concurs in here as well. You can see if I zoom in, 3056. So all the instruments match. Everything is good. All we have to do now is wait until we start this turn and keep tracking the flight all the way down, tracking these waypoints and our constraints and make sure we're good. So now would be a good time, incidentally, to go and bring up that flight plan once again and see how we're doing according to our plan. So, back down here, let's click on progress. We have 18 miles to go to the next waypoint, which is Golf Alpha Yankee Lima Lima. And looking at our flight plan, that's actually the final waypoint on our flight plan, and it says that we should be there at 1 hour and 17 minutes into the flight. We're currently 1 hour and 12 minutes into the flight. It's looking good, so in about 5 minutes time is when we expect to hit that. This is indicating an ETA 2203, so we're actually now 2 minutes ahead of schedule. So we're expecting 5 minutes to get there. It's saying down here it's only going to be 3 minutes to get there, so we are 2 minutes ahead of schedule, which is great. We're probably going to lose a bit of time in the approach. So with that said, I will see you once we start the left turn onto the downwind leg into Anchorage. Alright, so rejoining a little bit earlier than I thought because we're about to hit 10,000 feet, at which point, according to the checklist, two things happen. First, the landing lights go on, and second, we'll do the approach briefing. So I'm going to get the landing lights on a little early. Now, according to Boeing's Flight Crew Training Manual, the approach briefing needs to consist of a number of things, so let's go through what they are. First, weather and NOTAMs. Well, there are no NOTAMs that we're particularly aware of or worried about. In terms of the weather, there's some clouds, as you can currently see. Anchorage is directly ahead of us. We don't expect those to be a factor. The wind is calm, and we are landing ILS, runway 07 left. The type of the approach, well, it's an ILS, and the charts that we're using are from Navigraph, and they are current. So that's all good there. The navigation frequencies, well, the ILS is on 109.9 and its identifier is India Tango Golf November. We will be heading on a course of 071 degrees down onto the runway. Next, minimum safe sector altitudes. Well, if you look at the little circle there, minimum safe sector altitudes to the north-northeast are 1,800 feet. To the east-southeast is 5,600 feet, and to the westish is 8,900 feet. Again, we're not going to violate anything or risk smashing into anything. Looking out of the window, everything looks just fine. Now, our approach procedure, we're going to fly downwind until we hit about 3,000 feet. Then we're going to turn onto our final approach course and start our descent down to 1,600 feet. We're going to hold 1,600 feet until we are about 6.4 miles away, let's say 7 miles away from the airport, at which point we will intercept the glide slope and land. There are no speed restrictions other than the usual don't exceed 250 knots under 10,000 feet. Our VREF, however, is 142 knots, so our V approach speed is going to be 147. We will be landing with auto throttle on, and we do expect this to be a manual landing in the latter half of the approach. For missed approach, what we're going to do is fly runway heading, climbing to 600 feet, then a right turn to 230 degrees before finally intercepting the 209 radial from TED, Tango Echo Delta. When we land, now it says the next thing we need to cover is the taxi route to parking. Well, I honestly don't know that. We have a chart here, but I can never really accurately figure out where I'm going to stop. So taxi route to parking, we will turn left off the runway as soon as possible and then pretty much end the video there. Other than that, nothing more to be aware of except for management of AFDS. We are going to be flying autopilot all the way down until between 500 and 1,000 feet, at which point I will disengage the autopilot and land the aircraft manually with auto throttle on. So with all that done, having made our turn downwind now, Anchorage is off to the right. Let's go and take a look and see what we've got here. Alright, so we are at 8,000. We are higher than we should, higher than we want to be, or higher than the autoflight system wants us to be. We're about 2,000 feet too high, as expected. Remember I mentioned that earlier on. So we have a choice at this point. We could talk to ATC, who might vector us over here. They might send us direct to Echo November Alpha and then fly the 40-mile route in here. That's going to take way too long. We are the only people that exist in the world today in FSX, so we're not going to bother with that. We are just going to continue straight down here until we hit a sensible altitude, then turn back, and we should be good to go. Now notice this as well. The autoflight system, we're currently in VNAV speed, and the speed has been set to here, which is our, as I said, flaps 1 position. As soon as we hit that and we go flaps 1, then it will command a slower speed. So we're not going to do that. We're going to try to keep our speed up and be a good member of the traffic pattern here and not go too slow and hold everybody up. We will only go to flaps 1 when we consider to be at the initial approach fix, which is not actually according to what we see on the charts today, but when we hit about 3,000 feet. But you can see the speed is already coming down, and that's part of the reason we are too high at this point, is to drop the speed. The aircraft will level off. You can, if you so desire, throw out the speed brake and use that to slow down. It's not illegal. It is permitted. It is covered in Boeing's manuals. I'm trying not to do that, so I'm going to leave the speed brake exactly where it is at this point in time. We'll just watch what happens. You should see that as we hit this speed here, that we will just nose over. The engines should stay exactly where they currently are. We will just nose over and start to pick up some vertical speed to get back on path. We are currently 7,500 feet, and we are looking for about 3,000 before we start that final turn. You see we're in the vector waypoint now, so we're just going to fly a straight line straight out here. Let's change the scale of this down. We will set our heading selector to match what we're currently doing, just in case something goes horribly wrong, which it won't. There we go. We're starting our descent now. Now, because we're still in VNAV path, because we're still in VNAV, we're in VNAV speed, but because we're still in VNAV, it will be a fairly easy descent down to 2,000, because it doesn't want us to break this constraint. So we're actually confusing the autopilot here, the autoflight system, in particular VNAV, a little. So what I can do is temporarily come out of VNAV, we'll click on vertical speed, and we will try to increase our vertical speed a little to get down a little sooner. Now we can see when we're going to hit the altitude that we want to be at by just changing the range here, and look at the green banana. The green banana says that 20 miles out we will be at 2,000 feet. That's a heck of a trip, isn't it? Let's watch our speed. Speed is not increasing, which means we could increase our vertical speed. Just keep an eye on the speed here and make sure that doesn't start climbing up. Notice the green bananas come in. It's now 15 miles out, which is a little more reasonable. Speed is slowly starting to creep upwards. So we'll leave our vertical speed exactly where it is at this point in time. We're looking for 3,000 feet anyway, not 2,000. So, because it's at or above 2,000 at this waypoint, and then descending from there. So we're actually in good shape at this point. We'll just let the altitude keep on dropping down, at which point we'll re-engage VNAV, go to flaps 1, that will command a slower speed, and we'll start our right hand turn. Let's reduce the range here so we can see exactly where we are and what's going on. The other alternative, if I was a lot better than I am, is actually to turn left and then intercept this radial from Echo November Alpha, which is the correct radial to fly for this approach. We're going to keep things very simple today. As I said in the previous 2 parts of this video, this is really aimed at people who are new or very, very, very rusty like me with the NGX, especially people who have just switched over to FSX Steam Edition and have picked up the NGX now it's been updated for that sim. Notice though we're good, our speed is still nice and high. Normally in my videos at this point I am way too slow. We're not making that mistake today. So under 5,000 now. Let's switch the radios over and basically activate the ILS. Should see some information appear up here, and we do. There's a little diamond there showing us the VOR localizer radial that we are not on at this point. We can also at this point switch this over. If you right click, that puts that into ILS mode. You can see we are completely off course and too low at this point in the flight. so backup instruments as well. What we'll also do is look down here. Now I didn't do these previously, but I'll do them now. These buttons determine which frequencies, which radio systems you can communicate on. So normally we would have that selected for COM1. We're also now going to select this one, which is the marker. So as we pass over the various markers on our approach, you'll hear bing, 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 showing us that we're at the right place. So 4,000 feet. Let's look for 3,500 feet. And we will bring up the legs page here, and we're going to go direct to this waypoint. So 3,700, we'll click on this waypoint now to select it, and then we're just going to click on the top LSK to make that waypoint the current one. And we'll do that right about now. Arm VNav once again. Let the autoflight system manage us, and we will execute. And we should start a nice right-hand turn. Let's go flaps 1, and you will see the autoflight system command a lower speed. There it goes. Now as we turn out here, we're going to look to intercept the localizer. So we're looking for this little diamond down here to start moving, at which point we will arm VOR lock. So instead of LNAV guiding us on our route according to the flight plan, we're going to be tracking a radial, which is the ILS, down onto the runway. Just watching for that to start moving. There it goes, VOR lock. You can see now this is commanded LNAV VOR lock. So we're currently in LNAV until we intercept that localizer, then we'll go to VOR lock. Speed is coming down nicely. Altitude is coming down nicely. This constraint has us at or above 2,000, so we're not going to descend any more below 2,000. At this point, we will, immediately after that waypoint, we'll go down to 1,600. Speed is coming down. We should have before that turn gone to flaps 5, but now the speed has come down, we can do that. So flaps 2 and flaps 5. Notice it will command a slower speed as soon as we do that. There we go. So distance, we are 22 miles away. Remember at 6 miles, or let's say 7 miles, we're going to be descending on the glide slope. Now normally, when you intercept the glide slope, that's the point at which you would go flaps 15 gear down. We're probably going to do that a little bit sooner today, because it is a very short descent. It has us holding 1,600 as the minimum until only 6.5 miles away. And that's not a lot of time to go from flaps 5 all the way down to flaps 40. So I suspect at about 15 to 10 miles out, we'll start slowing down a little bit more. So it's still, as is the way with my videos, going too slow too soon, but I think that's fine for today. You saw this just light up. That's the glide slope. We're currently underneath it, as we should be. Let's start looking at our landing procedure and landing checklists. So cabin notification. Let's assume we've told the crew what we're going to do. Flaps are starting to be extended now. Our roll mode for final approach is VOR lock. Final approach course should be 071 degrees. I don't know how that got knocked off. Let's put that back. That got knocked off on both sides, didn't it? So now it's correct. I'm just waiting for the glide slope, at which point, well, a little earlier than the glide slope, we'll go to flaps 15 and gear down. Our speed brake will get armed at that point as well. Nothing else to do but sit and wait and watch this count down. Proceeding nicely. So let's start now thinking about reducing speed once again. So I'm going to go next stage of flaps, flaps 10. Notice the indicated airspeed has now come up. At about 7 miles is when we want to hit the glide slope. You can see the diamond is up here now. So let's bring our speed down manually a little bit more. We'll go flaps We're 10 miles out, so we won't go flaps 15 just yet. Oh, actually, we do need to, because we're passing the minimum speed for flaps 10. So flaps 15. We will hold this now. Nine miles out. Let's check our engine start switches are on continuous. We turn on the runway turn-off lights and the taxi lights at this point, so we don't have to mess with them on the ground because we're the only person in the cockpit. 8.5 miles out. This should start to move very slowly. And as I said, we will do things a little sooner than on the chart, just in the interest of me trying to talk you through everything that is happening at this point. Let's set our heading to match what we're currently doing. There. For our missed approach in particular. 7 miles. Okay, so let's arm approach now. We'll go gear down. We'll drop our speed down now to 147, which is our V approach. And then we can start reducing, or sorry, increasing the flaps once again. And it's going to be a fairly well-ordered progression all the way down now to our landing flaps of flaps 40. Each time, just looking to see that the flaps have stopped moving. And landing flaps, and we are 5 miles out and about to intercept the glide slope. So with that done, let's just cross-check everything here. We are in approach. We will be starting to descend soon. It's a fairly late descent. I don't know why they keep us so high other than maybe the water. And we're in single channel, so we'll arm command B as well. Dual channel, there is the marker. That's the outer marker. And we will let the aircraft establish itself, so put itself into a stabilized approach. And because we have command A and command B set up, we don't need to disarm the autopilot in a hurry around about 1,000 feet. We can relax a little. The aircraft will land itself if we need to, but just in the event of any issues, we will set our missed approach altitude of 2,500 feet. Just looking for the runway lights now. There they are. And we are now in a stable approach. See this? We're at our VREF plus 5. So V approach, we are on the glide slope, we are on the localizer, we're coming up on 1,000 feet. Everything looks absolutely perfect. Good idea at this point to make sure your throttles work. So I'm just moving mine back and making sure they show as being moved back. So I'm actually going to bring them back to idle. My physical throttles. Auto throttle is still managing the flight at this point. Feet on the rudder pedals ready. We are 700 feet. Runway's in sight. A little bit murky here today. Very stable. Middle marker. There's 500 feet. Autopilot disarmed. I have control. Let's bring that nose down. Remember, small changes. So we are still in a stabilized approach, even though I'm actually a little bit too low on the pitch at this point. We are still in a stabilized approach. As we pass over the threshold here. Oh, should have trimmed the aircraft a little. Down we go. Let's start to flare. Now I screwed up, obviously, the aircraft ballooned. That was my poor flying. We'll put the reversers up. That was too long a landing, and at the end of it, it wasn't a stable approach. Haters gonna hate. You get the idea, I'm sure. Live videos. I'm not gonna re-record this. Right, 80 knots, so off the reversers. Double tap the brakes. That will disarm the auto brake system. Gently apply the brakes and slow us down. Need to be looking at about 30 to 20 knots for turn off, which is why we missed that turn off right there. I'm just going to let it coast. There's another one coming up. You can see even with that long landing we had plenty of runway, but yes, I could have done a much better job. Alright, so gently on the brakes. It is a high-speed turn-off, so we can do it above 20 knots. And around we go. And normally at this point our first officer will have very kindly pulled in the flaps, pulled in the speed brakes. Now, one error to note, I didn't arm the speed brake. I actually missed that on my checklist. What we should have done as well, when the gear came down and the flaps went down, is we should have armed the speed brake, which is just moving that speed brake lever one notch like that, and you'll see a little green light come up here that says speed brake. That's why we had a warning here. So the second big mistake of this video, other than the long landing, is I didn't have the speed brakes armed. But even so, again, we're down, we're just fine. So we'll turn the landing lights off at this point, leave the taxi lights on if we wanted. We can start the APU and then taxi over to the gate, which I'm not going to do. Anyway, that's it for the end of this fully loaded series on the NGX. A few more mistakes. Please forgive me. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. My name is Froogle, and until next time, I'll see you very soon.